Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, hello.
Okay, well, I will go ahead and I know we're a couple minutes in and there's more folks coming in, but I'll go ahead and get us launched. My name is Mariah. I'm Senior Director of Community here at Backflip, and super excited to have y'all. If you haven't already, go ahead and throw where you're joining in into the chat. And just to set the stage for tonight, like I said, I'm from Backflip, which is a really great tool. It's a free app that helps investors to make that good gut decision on whether a property is going to be a good investment or not. And then when you're ready, you can actually do funding with Backflip as well. We do these twice a month. And so it's great to see some new folks, some familiar, faces. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to this incredible couple. Ali and Josh, take it away.
So much, Mariah. We're so excited to be here tonight. We connected with Backflip like years ago,
Literally,
I feel
yeah.
like, and being able to use their app for like the deal analysis component and learning more about all of that, like it's been really amazing. So it's really cool to speak tonight. And we are really excited to share our experience. This was our first BRRRR, and we're going to share the ins and outs, the mistakes we made, the successes we had, and then Q&A. Definitely feel free to interact in the chat throughout and ask questions. And if they're relevant and we can kind of sneak some questions in during the presentation, we will, but we will have that dedicated time at the end. So I'm just going to share our screen so you can see the beautiful PowerPoint that I made. All right. So how we made 50K using BRRRR, a case study. If that is not a clickbait title, I don't know what is, guys. You're in for it.
So we're located in upstate New York, as we mentioned. Specifically, we're in the Albany region. I saw we had some folks from Long Island, we had Schenectady, some other folks in the Northeast. So we're about 2.5 hours north of New York City. We met back in college, I think in 2011, became best friends, subsequently fell in love. We got married in 2018. We're both former social workers, now full-time real estate investors. We're also very new parents. That was a reason we couldn't do a whole lot of these types of presentations, but thankfully we can today. And as I mentioned, we're full-time real estate investors, coaches, and then we also create content full-time through the FI Couple.
So where we started, if you're catching our story now or you're meeting us tonight for the first time, we're going to talk a lot about all of the real estate experience that we have, but just a few short years ago, that was not what life looked like for us. We both worked full-time and part-time jobs in the human services. Like when we first started, for example, I was a shelter manager at a domestic violence agency. Josh worked at a group home. We were making $10 an hour. We had tons of student loans, over $100,000 of combined debt. We were not in a good financial position. We were living paycheck to paycheck, and we were super financially illiterate. Neither of us came from families that had money or had a lot of like knowledge about smart money habits. So we were not in a great position when we got our start.
Yeah, we've come a long way since then. Thankfully now, at the time it didn't feel great, but back in 2018, I was unexpectedly fired from a job. And that led us to having some real deep, honest conversations about the kind of like the lifestyle that we wanted, and kind of like pushed us towards getting better with money, subsequently getting started in real estate, and then working towards financial freedom. So where we are today, right? So we've paid off the $100,000 of student loans with the help of real estate. Did that in 3 years. Today we own 11 units worth about $1.35 million of real estate. We're actually negotiating a 5-unit seller finance deal right now, which will bring us up to 16 units. Overall, we'd like to add maybe 4 more doors to that, have about $2.5 million of real estate. We actually left our full-time jobs after about 10 years of work in our early 30s. And then back in 2020, we created the FI Couple, where we help everyday people get better with money, invest in real estate, and reach financial independence faster. And to our surprise, this is still kind of crazy because we're not social media people. Our content actually gains over 10 million impressions every single month.
So that's like a very high level overview of kind of where we've been and, where we are now. But I don't want to downplay the journey to get here was so incredibly challenging. Yeah. We wanted to quit 5 million times, and like a lot of tears, a lot of failures, a lot of mistakes. And now our goal is really to help, help others on their investing journey and maybe learn from some of the challenges and mistakes we've had, but also like, you know, we're regular everyday people. We didn't come from money. We weren't handy. We didn't have real estate in our family. We learned and we taught ourselves. And if you're in the audience today and you're very wanting to be involved in real estate, but you maybe don't have the knowledge or experience, if you really commit yourself and stay consistent, I believe that, you know, anyone that wants to be a real estate investor, if they put the time in, they can develop the skills to do that. So if you're new to us and you just want to learn more about who we are, what we've done, our story, we've been featured in a number of different publications. Good Morning America, CNBC, Bigger Pockets. We were on their podcast twice, which was really fun. Forbes, Entrepreneur, Business Insider. So those are just some resources if you want to learn more about us.
So enough about us.
Enough about us. We're going to dig into BRRRR.
So tonight we're going to be talking about the BRRRR strategy. And so for people who aren't familiar with this acronym, it stands for buy, rehab, rent out, refinance, and repeat. So as far as the acquisition of the property, can you just move our whole thing? As far as the buy part, you know, so there's a lot of ways to go about purchasing properties for the sake of using the BRRRR strategy. It could be anything from private money, hard money, which we use and we'll talk about later. Using HELOCs, things of that nature. The rehab part, so this is completing any necessary renovation. So you will see stories of people online who have done like full gut rehabs where they strip it down to the studs and stuff like that. That wasn't really our strategy. We're not really like full rehab types of people. Renting out the units, and then subsequently, and this is like one of the biggest parts, is the refinance part. And there's a lot of factors that go into that refinance, which we'll talk about later, that can really take a BRRRR from a really, really good life-changing deal like it was for us. And then it can also kind of go south really, really quickly, which we'll talk about. And then last but not least is the do it again, the repeat part. This is where you'll see investors. David Green is very famous. He came up with this acronym where because of the way BRRRR is structured, you're able to recycle your money much, much faster typically than a traditional 25% down type of purchasing. And as a result, you can scale your portfolio much faster.
So the pros and cons of this strategy, there's a few. So benefits are it allows you getting into a deal with low or no money down. As Josh just said, if you're a conventional investor going to a brick and mortar bank, you have to put down 25% if you're not living in your rental property. And in markets, even for us, that would have been a lot in upstate New York, where we were buying properties for 150, 200,000. But if we were in markets like New York City, California, where properties can go over $1 million, I mean, think about how long that would take you to scale if you had to put 25% down each time. So you can build your equity a lot faster. You can buy properties that many investors may not want. So this is buying properties that are maybe in rougher shape. You can put in that sweat equity and improve it, and then you're able to, you know, refinance it. And then again, achieve higher or even infinite cash on cash or ROI, meaning when you put such little money down, after you refi, you have the potential to get most of your money out of the deal and then do it again, which is incredible. Now, some of the challenges with BRRRR, the scope of worker costs can become greater than anticipated. When you buy a rental property, you have a nice idea of what you think everything is going to cost. But then when you get into the property, you can have the fun reality of realizing that there's more problems than you anticipated and that those problems can cost a lot more money. Like when we bought our second rental property, I remember walking through and seeing a few cracked windows and being like, oh, how much could windows be? Well, you know, they're actually expensive. And when you need 15 of them and not a couple, it ended up costing us like $10,000 more than we anticipated in our budget.
And that was just the start with that property.
That was like the worst property. But anyway, these are the character building experiences that kind of help you on your journey so that the next property, you bet your bottom, I looked at every single window and we factored that into the cost. So, BRRRRs can be more time intensive from the start than just buying a nice turnkey property. You need creative finance, which is awesome, but people that might have never purchased a property before, it may seem a little nerve-wracking to use creative finance versus a bank, but we're going to get more into that. You know, compressed cash flow can happen when you refinance, and then tighter window to operate in. And we're going to actually get into that in some subsequent slides. So I'm going to keep it moving.
Are you clicking on? There we go. So the question is, can BRRRR still work in 2024, right? So, you know, even the deal that we're talking about, this was 2 years ago. BRRRR really kind of grew, I would say, in popularity, like in like 2018, especially 2019, when interest rates were like, you know, 4 or 5%, sometimes even less, right? So when you were refinancing a property, you were taking on like a 30-year fixed rate loan as your refinance, and it was like 4.5, sometimes 5, maybe 6% for investors, right? We're not talking about home occupancy loans. Well, in 2020, obviously everything flipped, right? So instead of getting that nice 4.5 to 5%, all of a sudden you were staring down a 7 or 7.5%. And even in today's market, while rates have kind of slowed down a little bit, we're seeing a lot of investors still come in anywhere between 7.75 all the way up to 8.5 and sometimes 9%, depending on the type of the deal, if it's a DSCR loan, the property itself. And so that's where it can kind of get tight. And so that's where the slides that we're going to be talking about as far as how to properly find and vet these deals becomes really important.
So this is the property. We were so excited to buy it. It's a triplex in the local market that we invest in, upstate New York. And this is just going to walk you through step by step exactly how we did it. Because I think often with BRRRRs and hard money and private money, it can seem so overwhelming and intimidating. And I personally learn best from example and just seeing how someone else did something. And then you realize, we're not smarter than you. We're not savvier than you. We just did it. These are very, like, I don't want to critique us, but we're not geniuses here. These are very easy, repeatable strategies that anyone can do.
Before we dive in,
diligence.
I want people to know too, like, we read all the books, we did all the podcasts, and that got us like 80% of the way to doing this deal.
But nothing teaches you like experience.
And there were probably like 15 moments within the deal that, like, things you just can't find from a book, where we're like, this was a terrible idea. Why did we think this? Oh, appraisal goes bad, blah, 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 which
the night before we closed, a pipe, do you remember we were doing the walkthrough with the owner and a pipe burst and the whole basement was flooded?
Yeah.
And this was our third property that we bought at the time. If this was our first, I would have been like sobbing, having a casual mental breakdown. This one, I was like, it's okay, whatever.
We'll come back tomorrow.
You're going to fix the pipe. We're all good though.
Yeah.
So, you know, real estate toughens you a little bit. All right. So anyway, how we found the deal. So I'm actually going to let you take this because you found the deal.
Yeah. So perpetually networking, you know, one of the things I had mentioned to Mariah is we spend years sometimes, you know, getting coffees, going to real estate meetups. Networking isn't necessarily like this fast and quick thing, because the thing is maybe more than any industry, at least in my experience, real estate really is a relationship driven, whether it's finding deals, finding capital, so on and so forth. So through a lot of networking, we met with, we actually had a company who was servicing other properties of ours. We spoke to the owner, and subsequently that business owner tipped us off to like a cousin who was in a tight spot and needed to sell their property quickly. And we're always telling people kind of who we are, what we're doing, and then what we're looking for, like what would be a good deal for us.
If you are a new or aspiring investor, I would wager to guess that you may have or currently struggle with imposter syndrome of, like, you don't want to call yourself a real estate investor. Maybe you're nervous going to the real estate meetups because it's like, who am I? I don't know anything. I haven't done anything yet. And that was something that we really faced and was challenging. But the more we put ourselves out of our comfort zone and we went to these meetups and we talked to other investors and we said, hey, we're Josh and Ali. We're newlyweds. We live in upstate New York. We're looking to scale a small multifamily portfolio. We're always looking to buy. If you know anyone that owns properties, is thinking of selling, please keep us in mind. And you say that again and again, you will be shocked how many people you connect to that bring deals to you. It's incredible.
You just got to stay consistent with it. So in terms of the actual deal analysis, so researching comparable sales or comps to determine your after repair value. Now, if any of this is like over people's head, I totally get it. 7 years ago, I was like, I don't know what any of this means. But really, you're trying to find out what have similar properties in this area sold for, ideally in the last 6 months, sometimes in the last year, because now you have like, these are real deals that are similar, and now you have some real tangible data to go off of in terms of what those prices were. So for instance, we use Zillow to see recently sold properties. We also have many real estate agent friends who are also investors who gave us access to the MLS to get comps, so on and so forth. So once we knew what this property was reasonably worth, we could kind of start working backwards from there, which we'll dive into. We also needed to determine what was the reasonable rent, right? It was a 3-unit building. Each unit had kind of different room and different floor plans. And so figuring out that with the help of Zillow, Rentometer, Facebook, etc. So what we came to the conclusion was, and I know for some people these prices will seem ridiculous, the estimated value at that time was about $235,000, between $235 and $240. Now, we knew that we needed to have at least 25% equity. So where does 25% equity come from? Well, typically on this type of deal, a bank, depending on the lender, I should say, usually will only lend up to anywhere between 20 to 25%, what's referred to as loan to value. So if a property hypothetically was worth $100,000, many lenders don't want to go above 80,000, maybe 75, 80,000. Once you start going beyond that, they really like to see more equity because frankly, as the lender, that protects them. Depending on, some banks won't even do beyond 70% loan to value, but that's really going to be like a lender specific question. So that's how we did that. So for us, when we knew valuation between 235 and 240, we backed our way into, we knew our max allowable offer was about $190,000.
The reason for this is that we knew we wanted to buy the property for cash using hard money, put as little money into the deal, and then when we went around to refinance it, we didn't want to be stuck with having to leave a ton of money in the deal. And that's what ends up happening if you don't run your numbers appropriately or it doesn't appraise for what you need it to. So that's why all of this, like buying the deal is such a tiny piece of the equation. Like all of this back work and analysis and everything is so critical.
I just say one thing if you go,
No.
okay. as far as like, because you'll hear people will just kind of throw around the term like buy a deal. And I think sometimes people are kind of flippant. For us, a deal is only a deal if Mariah sells me a property on a Monday, if I can turn around on a Friday and make a profit, right? For me, that's actually, we're talking about a deal. That means I got enough of a discount. But realistically, sometimes people will pay like, you know, it's not a bad thing, but they'll pay like fair market value and they'll say like, oh, I got a deal. I'm like, sure, you got a property, but that's not necessarily to say you got a deal. And especially if you're looking to use the BRRRR strategy, you really need to get as deep of a discount as possible.
Yeah. So how we funded the deal, again, networking. Josh and I are very, very big on building personal connections and networking. So we had in our local network 2 investors, a retired couple. They had a paid off rental portfolio, and we knew that they occasionally lent private money. So we had been talking to them again for years about, hey, when the right opportunity strikes, you know, if you know anyone that may be interested in lending, you know, can we share with you? Oh, yes, absolutely. So we were interested in this property. We looked at what the ARV was. We looked at the analysis. We looked at comparable sales in the area. We looked at what rents would be. We wrote up an entire analysis of this property, also known as a pro forma. It's a nice little sheet that gives you the stats of the property. We had our pro forma, we had all the comps, and we approached them and said, hey, this is the property. We didn't say, can we borrow money from you? Because that may have put them way too on the spot. We said, if you know anyone that would be interested in a deal like this, would you take a look? they were interested, we were able to work out a deal and fund the property through them and their network, which was actually hard money lending because it wasn't a private investor, it was more of an institution. So we were able to borrow 180,000 of hard money, aka cash. The interest rate was high on this, it was 12%, 2 points. We put 5% down of our own money, and we purchased the property at $190,000. So in total, the cash to initially close on this deal with hard money was 16,660. So that's down payment plus closing costs.
So a couple things real quick, just to kind of spotlight there. So, you know, it's not uncommon, especially if you're just getting started, where an investor, or I'm sorry, like a lender, just to kind of hedge their bets a little bit and protect themselves, they might charge what's referred to as a point. A point is the equivalent of 1%, right? So if you took out
the purchase price
of the purchase, well, yeah, of the amount financed.
Right.
So if you took out $180,000 loan, 1 point would be 1,800, 2 points would be 3,600. So that's a fee directly to the lender, basically to compensate them for being able to work with you. And then a lot of times people will, when they're running the analyses, they'll say like, oh, okay, I only have to put 5% down. There's also a lot of closing costs that can go in, and those can vary a little bit by the state that you're in. And the state of New York, it's typically like 3.5%. All those costs are important to factor in.
Yeah, you have to calculate it all.
So also a common misconception with BRRRR is that what we mentioned earlier is that like you need these massive guts. Like we always joke, like we're no Chip and Joanna Gaines, right? So we're not going in there knocking out walls per se. This property only needed about $2,500 of work. It was mostly cosmetic. Really, the distress wasn't the property. The property owner or former owner owned it for 12 years. They were ready to no longer be a landlord anymore, and they were trying to close on their dream home. So they needed cash quickly, right? So we were able to come in, understand what their pain point was, work to solve a problem for them. And then ultimately we were able to solve it by getting them cashed out. I think, yeah, we all in all, it took about 30 days to get them cashed. We waived inspections. We did walk the property with a local contractor, though.
When you're a real estate investor, you are a problem solver. So we saw a distressed seller. We said, hey, we can close quickly. We won't cause problems. We don't even need an inspection. We don't need an appraisal because we're buying it in cash. And no inspection doesn't mean we don't look at the property and make sure it's a good fit for us. We went, our contractor came with us. We looked at every inch of that property and made sure any challenges we were willing to inherit. Like we have a baseline of non-negotiables. Like if there's a massive structural issue, we're not touching it. So if there's massive electrical issue, massive heating issues, we're not touching that. That's our personal criteria. So we do look at our properties a lot and really make sure it's a good fit for us and what our skill set is. Okay, so renting out the units. So at the time of close, the property had 2 vacant units and one tenant was paying $775 a month, which was like painfully low for market rent, but paying tenant for us was better than having a third vacancy at that point. So once the units were ready, we listed everything within 14 days. I think it was actually less than that. But the entire building was rented for $2,875. So we did a very quick turnover. Like we needed to do new locks. We got cleaners in, we painted, like it really, this property needed nothing. So we used that rental income to pay our monthly payment to the hard money lender. So if you go to a bank, you buy a property, you get a mortgage, and every month you make a mortgage payment to the bank. The way private and hard money works is your lender is your bank. So for us, we paid this couple every month because they owned the property essentially. Well, they lent us the money that helped us own the property. So we just paid them that 12% interest every month. Rents could have been higher, yes, but for us, it was a priority to get it rented and know that within time you can gradually raise rents.
And the reason, you can go ahead. The reason that was so important too is because now that the property was rented, now we had a rent roll we could actively show. And you have two kind of things co-occurring, right? So on one hand, right, you're networking a ton to find a lender going into the property and just the act of finding a property. But then once you're in it, now you're co-currently renovating, renting, fixing up the property. And then you're also working to find a bank that's willing to cash you out via a refinance. And so there's a lot going on. And like I said earlier, in a relatively short period of time, a lot of times people will buy a property, and they're thought 30-year fixed rate mortgage. I don't really have to think about financing for a very long time. With the BRRRR strategy, it's a very truncated timeline. 6 months, you'll be amazed how fast 6 months can go by, especially when there's money coming and going. So originally, our plan was to use the purchase or use the hard money that we borrowed in April, stretch it all the way out to October. That was a 6-month agreement. When we began the process of finding banks, it looked like we would have be able to get about a 5.5%. This is where we were back in 2022 when rates were still relatively low. And then all of a sudden, rates kind of started taking off on us while we were going through the refinance process. We actually had an appraisal come in. The appraisal came in incredibly low, which was kind of overwhelming. We ended up having a second appraisal done, which was nice, came in higher, but we also took on a much higher interest rate.
So the property's performing awesome today. So this is just a breakdown of the numbers. So rent collected, total payment, the reserves that we take out for any, we have like a little savings fund if there's any updates or maintenance things that we need to do. So it cash flows, this is genuine cash flows, $700 a month right now. Rents are still below market in one of the apartments, so we're actively working to raise it. So the total amount invested, 29,000, cash on cash return of 29%. So the present market value, it's gone up quite a bit since we purchased it in 22, almost 300,000. So we have about $126,000 in equity.
So, and one of the things that people will ask
I'm gonna
too,
stop our share.
one of the things that people sometimes will ask, will say, if you don't take all of your money out of a BRRRR, like, was it even successful? Was it a failure? So on and so forth. So as a point of reference, right? So if we had gone, call it a traditional or more conventional route of buying this property, 25% down, still would have had the same renovation cost, we probably would have paid just under $60,000 in total, right? Whereas because we got creative, we used a hard money loan, we hustled, so on and so forth, we kept our all-in cost below $30,000. And because of that, and we won't go into it, but we were able to then buy, I think, another like four units like 7 months later, because we were able to keep a lot of our cash aside.
What people need to realize with BRRRRs though, right, is you have the initial closing when you buy it with the private or the hard money. So you have the down payment and the closing costs, but you need to refinance it. That's a part of the BRRRR. So then you have a second closing where more money is coming out. So you have to account that you're going to have cash coming out for both of those double closings. But as Josh just said, even with those two closings, we spent about half that we would if we put down 25%. So that is it for that case study. Definitely want to open it up to Mariah and any questions and kind of see how we can talk more about all this.
Yeah, I see that we have a lot there.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. It's like a front row seat to learning so much. So thank you all so much. Yeah, it looks like we have some questions in both the chat and the Q&A. The first one that came in was, are all your rental properties in the same market/area?
They are, and we do this very intentionally. We actually make sure that all of our rentals are within like a 10-minute drive of each other.
Yep.
And that's very intentionally done because we self-manage our units. So we don't want to be driving an hour to this property, 2 hours to that property.
And by self-managed, so right now we handle like the leasing, and then we also handle the bookkeeping. But we, as far as like a lot of the maintenance and routine repairs and stuff like that we outsource. And so a lot of times that's also really nice as far as our contractors. So they're not driving super far. So they can check on 2 or 3 properties all within 10 minutes of each other. It definitely makes it a little bit more complicated because there are more, we'll call them affordable areas if we drove like 30 minutes in opposite directions. But we had an old mentor years ago who, when they were just getting started, they would just buy properties anywhere. And it made sense when they were like single and just kind of starting out and stuff like that. But eventually they owned a portfolio and everything was like 45 minutes to an hour apart. And they were married and they had kids, and they're like, it kills them to have to drive like 45 minutes this way and so on and so forth. And so we're really strategic
You have
about
to
where
build
we
it
buy,
intentionally.
super
Yeah.
intentionally.
One of the other questions I think dovetails really well into this is, do you use any tools to research and find and analyze the properties?
Yeah, so as far as finding the properties, a lot of that is kind of word of mouth, but we also use tools like PropStream as a way of kind of finding off-market deals and contacting the owners. Backup actually has a really cool deal analyzer if people haven't already used it. You can get a ton of data that some of it's publicly accessible and some of it is private, which is really nice. And then we have our own spreadsheets and things of that nature.
Awesome. Amazing. Next question, how do you choose your properties? Decent schools, Starbucks, Walmart nearby? Can you drop a few examples?
Yeah.
So we live in New York, we invest where we live, and for us it's really important, like the cities that we invest in, they're desirable places to live. We look for positive job growth. We look at like, you know, industries coming in, like different businesses, colleges, hospitals. They're essentially places that people want to live. And for us, that's really been in our favor because we never have a shortage of highly qualified, amazing people to live in our home. So that's really exciting for us.
And it's not like a foolproof way, but we do typically look for within like 2 to 3 miles of a Starbucks. I remember years ago reading an article about the Starbucks effect, and the more that I dug in, because like they spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on like market research, so long before they plunk down a new store, like they feel very confident about a region. So things like that, but also like Ali said, like we have colleges, universities, hospitals, large employers. So all of that, and plus walkable downtowns, and we kind of strike that balance in between.
When you think of buying properties, it's referred to as like the neighborhood class. So like A class is like the most amazing, pristine luxury neighborhood, and like D class would be like very, very rough, not an amazing area. So there's pros and cons with all different areas. We typically look for like B class, so like nice, safe, clean, working class neighborhoods, where properties may need a little TLC, but we can make it nicer. But for us, our biggest thing was always like, we would want to feel safe living here. We would want to feel safe in this area. And I think that's been a good strategy for us. It's worked in our favor.
One thing I would add too is because of the way that we buy using creative finance, whether it's BRRRR or owner financing and stuff like that, and because we work really hard to get good deals, we're actually able to keep our rents, I think, objectively very affordable. So whatever the median rent is, we're usually anywhere between 3 to 5% below the median. Now, if we were paying like full price for properties and we were taking on like 8.5%, and we were trying to do that, that's a lot harder. We'd probably be negative on a lot of our deals. And so something that we really hang our hat on is the affordable rents.
Love that. There's a couple questions that talk about like the beginning of your journey. So one of them was, did your investing into properties start prior to paying off your retail/loan debt? So that's the first one.
Yes, and it's actually really funny because what we did is not what I would necessarily advise someone. So I'll tell you what we did, and then I'll tell you what I think you should do, or not giving advice, but what I would say to someone in our shoes looking back. What we did was, yes, we had over 6 figures of debt. We had so much student loan debt, you know, car debt, credit card debt, everything. And we were living paycheck to paycheck. We were renting a luxury apartment for $1,400 a month, which was way more than we could afford. So we scraped together literally every dollar we had, and we bought a house hack. So like Cliff Notes version of that is, we bought a duplex, we put 5% down, we moved into half of it, and then the tenant paid half of our mortgage. So instead of paying $1,400 for that luxury apartment, we were paying $400 a month towards a property that we owned. So that was the first thing that allowed us to lower our cost of living. So then we had more of a gap between our income and expenses, so we could really put money into our debt. So for new investors, when we talk to them and they have not a great financial situation, they have a ton of debt, you know, all of that type of stuff, we always say you really want to solidify your finances, because for us, we got lucky. If anything broke in that first property, we did not have a lot of money. We had like a couple thousand in the bank account. We were running real skinny margins there. But if we had like a $10,000 repair at the time, we wouldn't have been able to manage it without having to put it. We would have figured it out. We would have put it on credit cards and we would have paid it off. But I think that you want to be strategic, because things break, things go wrong. Investing can be an expensive game. So you want to have a solid financial foundation. I think why it made sense for us to invest in the position we were in was because we were working towards reducing our cost of living.
Yeah, and we barely qualified for our first loan. We had a mortgage broker who went to back for us. I had to cash out an old 401k from the job that I got fired. But it was like we were willing to do whatever we needed to do because we knew the situation we were in. And I was driving Uber at the time, listening to Bigger Pockets, and I was like, I know we can do this. We just have to find one good deal. And we found a great off-market deal, and we almost canceled it the night before because we were so afraid, because we didn't have a mentor or anything like that. But yeah, so and then because, like Ali said, because we lowered our cost of living, we sold our car. We were working at one point, I think we had like 5 or 6 jobs between us.
We were willing to get very uncomfortable and work very, very hard to put ourselves in a better situation.
And that was the season of life we were in.
We just grinded it out.
And we did, and I would say for 3 years or so, 3 or 4 years, that was kind of our MO. And then we actually we bought another house hack 18 months later, and that got our rent from 400 down to 0. And so we were living under, we were spending less than like $2,500 a month, like bare bones. Every dollar extra that we had was half of the year was paying off debt. And then if we hit our goals, the other half of the year was saving up for our next rental. And that's just what we did.
It was like not sexy. It was just pushing through and doing what we needed to do, you know?
So there's some questions a little bit more about diving back into the explanation of the refinancing. So one question was, I didn't understand the refi strategy from the case study. Could you please re-explain? And then the second part of that is, who did you guys use for refinance?
Perfect. Yeah, I can do it. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna, so I'm like less of the number person, so I feel like I can explain it in a non-technical. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm gonna explain it how I would need to explain to me. So if you see a property that you like and you want to do the BRRRR strategy, you would get creative financing, so private or hard money. This is essentially like someone's writing you a check and you're giving it to the seller. Yep. So we got hard money. So we said to the seller, here's $190,000. We own the property now, but we have a loan with our hard money lender, right? So every month we have to pay them interest only payments at 12%. So that 12% interest, we have to pay them interest every single month. Now that's usually only short term. It's not usually for a 30-year span. It's a bridge loan. So we had a bridge for 6 months where we had to make those interest only payments. So they are essentially the bank. Bridge loans are not forever, they're temporary. So once those payments were coming to an end, we had to take that property that was financed through that bridge loan hard money lender, and we needed to put it on a 30-year bank loan. So we went to a bank and we said, hey, we own this property. Our mortgage is $180,000, right, through the hard money lender. We believe it's worth $240,000. Can we apply for a loan? So when you apply for a loan, you have to get it appraised, right? So we had an appraiser come out. They looked at it. The appraiser said, yes, Josh and Ali, you're geniuses. It is worth $240,000.
The second guy.
Yeah, the first guy did not say that.
So you're idiots.
That guy was an idiot.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the appraiser comes out, they tell you what it's worth, and then the bank, you refinance it. So what that means is you're no longer going to have the bridge loan to the hard money lender, you're going to have the loan to the bank. So when you refi, you go through a whole closing again. It's like you're buying it again, you're just getting a loan through another person. So you still have to pay the closing costs and all of that. But now, instead of being on a 6-month bridge loan, you're on a 30-year loan, and we had like a fixed interest rate. Did I explain that in like a simple way?
I think you
I
nailed
feel
it.
like I tried to be
I think,
cohesive with
yeah,
it.
I think you nailed it.
So in terms of who we went through, I don't have any specific recommendations for that. I know Backflip does awesome lending for bridge loans and whatnot, but you know, the thing that I would say with a 30-year mortgage lender, shop around, you know, see who can give you great rates, competitive deals, any incentives with that. You can go to like a brick and mortar bank like KeyBank, Chase, Wells Fargo. You can go to credit unions, or you can go to a mortgage broker. So this is a person who's like an individual entity, and they will shop you around at different big box banks. But also know that once you buy the property, they're going to sell it off, the loan.
Mhm.
Awesome. While
Yeah.
we're on the like numbers money side, a question about that. So it says you mentioned you put 5% down, 10K of your own money and cash to close, plus closing costs was $16,650. Did that include your 10K?
Yeah. So that was our down payment. That was our closing costs, and I think also the $2,500 for renovation. I say renovation, but it was really just like updates.
Awesome. Question about HELOCs. So can you talk a little bit more about HELOCs?
Yeah, so there's a lot of folks right now whose homes have appreciated immensely in the last, 10 years, but especially in the last like 4 to 5 years. And so they're sitting on a lot of equity. And so a lot of people, they might not have, 250 or $300,000 of cash, but their properties have, upwards of 250 to $300,000 equity. So right now, a lot of folks are looking to, how do I tap into the home equity in my property, and use that money to then go buy rental properties, which totally makes sense. And if done in a prudent manner, I think it can be totally viable, right? Your property essentially becomes your bank, your hard money lender, your private money lender, et cetera, especially if you have a paid off property. I think it's something like 54% of homes in the United States are like paid off, and 70% have a mortgage below 4%. Like there's a ton of equity out there right now. So there's people who will take home equity lines of credit and then they lend that out at 3 to 4% more than what they're borrowing. And it's a whole side business. But anyways, what I usually don't recommend people do though is take out a HELOC and then try to use that as just like a down payment on a property. A lot of lenders won't even allow you to do that, because what you're essentially doing is you're taking a loan and a loan from the bank. You're taking a HELOC loan and a bank loan to try to finance a deal. So you're 100% leveraged. Banks don't typically like to see that. They actually want some equity so that everyone's protected, especially them. So usually what I would say is if you have enough equity in your home, and a bank could tell you kind of how much that would be and what rate you would pay. And if you can take that and go and buy a property all cash, implementing the BRRRR strategy, refinance out, get all of your money back out, or at least a vast majority of it, and then pay off your HELOC, that's a way you could recycle that.
Awesome. Lots of questions about the financing side. So thanks y'all for answering. One of them is, do you think if a hard money lender allows you to get into a deal with the least amount of money out of pocket, total 15% capturing all the loan costs, excluding the third party, does the interest rate matter as much? Is there a formula that you use that you could share?
Yeah. So, as far as 50, with the least amount of money out of pocket, 15% capturing all the loan costs. So there's a couple questions. So you want to have as much equity as possible, right? So at least 25%, ideally, depending on the lender. Some lenders, like a DSCR loan or debt service coverage ratio lender, might allow you to do like 80% loan to value, but anyways, or commercial lenders. As far as does the interest rate matter? Unequivocally, hell yes.
Yeah, it does.
And this is where people in the last 36 months, especially on the commercial side, have gotten into trouble, is because they took out bridge loans say it was 6 months, or in some cases in like the commercial space, you can take out like a 2 to 3 year bridge loan. Super, well, sometimes it's like high interest or low interest, they'll give you like a really low rate, but then it balloons after 3 years, but that's a whole side story. So anyways, a lot of investors, including us, right? When we bought this property, as we shared, we were underwriting a 5.5% interest rate.
Because that's what rates were, and they had been really low because of COVID. So what could possibly go wrong?
And in our mind, everything was going smoothly. We had that appraisal. Wow, we're so good at this. Man, we're going to make content, blah, blah, blah. Well, once that first appraiser came back and the appraisal came in like $15,000 lower.
More than that, it was like
$30,000 low. We were now in a fork in the road moment where we could take that lower interest rate, 5.5%, but we're going to have to bring a lot more money to the table. Or we can go back out into the marketplace knowing that, and I'm watching,
rates were 7%.
Rates are now 7%. A point and a half could cost you, thousands of dollars a year from a principal and interest perspective. And if your deal was already tight margins in terms of the equity, in terms of the cash flow, stuff like that, and you're financing it not at a 5.5, but a 7, or nowadays, if in your mind, you're like, yeah, I'm going to get this deal at a 7%, but you're actually talking to banks and they're clocking you in at like 8.5 or 9%.
That can really
completely kill a deal. And now you have a deal that you have to kind of either go through the motions, go through the refinance, and you're relatively upside down, not from an equity perspective, but from a cash flow perspective. Or I've known a lot of people where they kind of just like not dump the deal, but mid deal, they're just kind of like, you know what, I'm going to sell this off. Someone else will take it because there's enough equity. And so, yeah, that interest rate can make or break the deal.
Yes, awesome. Okay. There's so many good ones. So thanks y'all for, being super engaging. Quick question. Have you guys ever bought from a wholesaler?
No.
Not directly, no. Almost. Not opposed to it.
We're on a lot of wholesale lists, so we just haven't, but that doesn't mean we wouldn't.
We find, and this isn't like a brag or anything like that, but we are constantly finding deals. And the reason that is, though, it literally took like 6 years to build networking to build that pipeline, right? So, but if we didn't have that mechanism, then wholesalers could be reasonable.
I think that for a lot of people, you want to find off-market deals, meaning if they're on the MLS, that means they're on Redfin, Zillow, thousands of people know about it. Off-market deals, no one knows about it. It feels more secret, exclusive, and ideally more competitive in pricing. You can get a better deal on it. But the challenge that we found, especially in the current market, off-market deals doesn't mean it's a good deal. It's a property. It's not listed. They're not paying realtor fees, but it can be just as expensive as retail listed on the internet.
Yeah.
So you always want to do your due diligence and look at comparable sales and comparable home values in the area that you're looking, so that when you look at this property, you say, is this actually at a discount? Is this a deal? Or is this the same price as if I just bought it with a real estate agent? So you always want to think about that.
There's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of agents who will list it or market it as off market. And really, for me, again, like kind of like the guiding principle is, if I can buy it on a Monday and sell it at a profit on a Friday, okay, now it's actually a deal. If you can't confidently say that, then you're probably paying fair market.
Gotcha. Oh my gosh, there's so many. Let's get through some of these awesome ones. Okay, so there's a couple I'm gonna combine. It talks a little bit about house hacking. Have you ever utilized house hacking before you moved into the BRRRR strategy? And then when is it a good idea to live in a property for renting it out?
Yeah, so we actually did a BRRRR hack on our second property. That was fun. We've shared those pictures and stuff on. That was our one property where from wall to wall, side to side, we actually, all the floors, all the walls, everything, while we lived in it, because it was also a house hack. That was a fun 3 months or so.
But we house hacked twice, which means you move into a property as your primary residence. You have to live there for at least a year because it's a bank loan. This isn't creative finance. It's creative in the sense that you're putting very little money down, but you're using a 30-year mortgage lender bank, right, for house hacking. So for house hacking, for those two, you have to live there. That we did, we had to live there for a full year. House hacking was amazing. And what I would say for people looking to get started, is house hacking right for me?
Yep.
I think real estate investing can be very intimidating, but we all need a place to live, right? So you need a place to live. Instead of buying a traditional single family home or a condo, buy a multifamily home, or buy a single family home where you can turn the basement into a second apartment. And then you're a real estate investor and someone's helping you pay down your mortgage. You're getting experience about being a homeowner, being a landlord, how to manage maintenance. You're building those systems, and then you can have some confidence and experience to then go out and do more creative endeavors like a full-on BRRRR, or, you know, we're doing seller financing deals now. The deals that we're doing now would have been so intimidating to me as a new investor. So we say that house hacking is great for people that are looking to lower their cost of living, that are looking to get into a real estate deal with very little money down, and especially for new investors.
Yeah, we have a couple that we mentored some time ago in Nashville, and they bought a beautiful home, but it was probably a little bit more home than they needed, but it had this big vacant basement. And they used a loan product called the FHA 203K loan. So they renovated the basement into a beautiful Airbnb. That Airbnb covers their entire home cost, which is really powerful. And so it's real estate. House hacking is kind of like real estate on training wheels. I think it's a great way to start, especially now in 2024.
Yeah.
Awesome. There's a couple questions about working around expensive markets. So any advice for those interested in rental property investment, but in an expensive market? And then the second part is around investing virtually. If you live in a high cost housing market, would you partner with someone?
We have a lot of friends that live in expensive markets, and we work with a lot of people that live in expensive markets. And there's a few things that I want you to consider. One, what type of real estate investor do you want to be? Meaning, do you want to be able to drive to your property at a moment's notice, or like Josh, get your morning Starbucks and then do a little drive of all the properties to check them out? Or are you okay with being several hundred or thousand miles away from your property and you're kind of managing remotely? That's number one. You want to think about what is realistic for you and your temperament. But then the next thing that I would say is, do people invest in expensive markets? Yes. The strategies and the numbers and what success looks like, it looks different. Do people invest in more affordable markets? Yes, and that looks different. So there's no right or wrong answer. It really is going to depend on your overall goals. Like for us, when we work with people, we want to kind of reverse engineer it. So everyone has a number in mind. I want $10,000 a month cash flow, whatever it is. Okay, how do we build the bridge to get there? And we would want to look at both scenarios. Expensive market, how many properties are you going to need? How much money are you going to need invested? Okay, cheaper market, same thing. So I personally don't like to pigeonhole people into saying like, don't invest in expensive, only go here. You really want to think about you and what's realistic for your life. So that's not a very direct answer, but there's so much nuance with this. It's really person-centered.
It really is kind of like know thyself.
Yeah.
Love that. And do y'all own properties as an LLC or owned by you personally?
Yeah, so as of right now, they're in our personal names for the purpose of bank financing. Banks, depending on the lender you talk to, some banks are kind of finicky as far as lending to LLCs, especially new ones. A lot of times, even with an LLC, they may want you to personally guarantee the loan just so that way, God forbid, something goes south, they can still collect their money. That being said, though, now that our portfolio is kind of growing a little bit faster, we are in the process of formalizing entities and beginning the process of rolling some properties into those just for the purpose of asset protection.
Yeah, awesome. We did a webinar about that and opening LLCs for that liability, reducing liability as well. So that's good to hear. Cool. There's a couple more questions around interest rate. So what interest rate do you have for the property?
On this was 7%. What's cool, so this property that we're case study was 7%. And that was just what the marketplace was at the time, what a bank offered you. Now we do a lot of owner financing, right? And not to go all in on owner financing, but one of the cool things about it is, like, let's say Mariah has a paid off property and we're looking to buy it. we and Mariah can come up with the interest rate that makes sense for Mariah and us. We can come up with the terms, the price. It's completely between us. Usually we'll have lawyers just to make sure everything is legitimate, but it's so interesting. When we first started doing this, you're used to going to the bank and the bank says, this is the interest rate. With owner finance, it's like, well, what do we want it to be? What makes sense for you? We have a retired couple right now who they really don't want as much a high of an interest rate because then they'll have to pay more taxes, and that's not really something they want to do right now. So we're getting lower interest rates from them than what we would if we bought through a traditional bank.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, they just keep pouring in, y'all. People want to know. Cool. Okay, so next question. Can hard money lenders change interest rates? I know they're short, but curious on your experience. I could speak to that as well.
Yes and no. So typically, there's clauses and there's protections, right? So for instance, we had a 12% fixed rate for 6 months on this property. Now, if we failed to operate our end of the agreement and we didn't operate in the timeline that we had, we probably could have negotiated an extension with that hard money lender, but often it is within their rights, right? They can increase the rate, if we're going outside of the original agreed upon timeline.
I want to say though, with creative finance, private money, hard money, BRRRR, I think that sometimes people feel nervous about it because banks are so formal. There's red tape, there's paperwork, and creative finance can feel a little mysterious, like the Wild West. Like, how does it get done? You have lawyers, you have legal contracts, you have protections, you need to do your due diligence. It's not just like a handshake relationship and someone lends you money. At least that's not how it should be, right? So with that being said, it's really important to read all of the fine print. I'll give you a quick little story about a mistake that we made with reading the fine print. But again, this is like a learning opportunity. So for this property, we borrowed $180,000 at 12% interest, 2 points, and it was over a 6-month hold, meaning we had to pay a mandatory amount of 6 months worth of interest only payments. We planned to do that for the entire 6-month period. But as Josh said earlier, when we first started this process, interest rates, well, actually, when we found the property, interest rates were like in the 4s. But then by the time that we closed and we were getting ready to refinance, they were 5.5. And then by the time summer is going along and we're like, oh my God, it's 7, we really have to move and do this. So we closed on the refinance sooner than the 6 months. So we thought, well, we'll just keep paying the interest payments for the remainder of the 6 months. No, we were so dumb. Well, it is what it is. But when you refinance, all of the interest payments come due. So even though we refinanced 3 months into the term, that 6-month worth of payment, we had to pay it at the refi table. So that was something that we didn't realize, and it was just inexperience. We needed to look over the contract one more time, but that was just such a good, we had to pay the money either way, but that was a good example of a really good learning opportunity for us, with just going through that process. Your first time doing anything, you're going to make some mistakes and have some whoopsies, but we like to refer to them as an education, because you will remember it for next time.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I would say, I just want to reiterate from what you were speaking about before, adding on to what Josh said about, relationship building, right? As Backflip does our own lending, and it's all about creating that relationship, right? And so when your payments are coming due, or maybe you have some circumstances that you didn't foresee, if you have a great relationship with your lender, there's just a lot more that we can do to be able to work together in the months before you have to refi or whatever you end up doing. So I just encourage you to have a good relationship with the folks that you're working with.
One thing I would just is I can't emphasize, thank you so much for saying that, because I think sometimes people think they want to get into the deal and then try to start formalizing those relationships. And that's so much harder. And real estate is such as much data and analytics and algorithms, stuff like that. In our experience, it's still very much like a people person business. And it's all about connections. And so I'm glad that people are here right now and people are already kind of laying that foundation. It's so integral.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, we are right at time. So if we need to hop, we can do that. But just wanted to check in with y'all before we, wrap it up. We still have many more questions, but I want to respect your time as well. So how are y'all feeling?
Yeah, I would probably do a couple more questions, but
Okay.
after, yeah,
Let's do
just a couple.
like two more rapid fire and then
Fire
we'll
around, yeah,
Perfect, love it.
yeah.
yeah, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, cool. Any other rapid fire? So let's see. We've got how did you get 5% down for the purchase on the first deal? Most hard money seem to want more unless you're a seasoned investor.
Yeah, so a lot of it, for us at least, it was entirely contingent on loan to value, right? So for instance, we knew the deal was worth between 235 and 240, and we had a contract for 190, right? So we already had a pretty good spread. If we had brought that deal, so we just basically had to make up the gap. We were basically already at 20% loan to value. We just needed to get to 25. Now, if we brought that deal to Mariah and said, hey, we got this deal, ARV is 240 and we have it under contract for like 215, that's a tighter deal. So Mariah may say, you know what, 5% is really only going to get us to like 15% equity. So for us, our hard money lender was willing to allow us to do 5% because we could show in an objective manner we already had 20% because we had already negotiated that.
Gotcha. Awesome. This one has been asked twice, so I'll ask it as the last one. Can you explain what the benefit of refinancing with a 30-year loan? It seems as if once the bridge loan is satisfied, you would then be clear of debt.
No, so yeah,
No.
because in order to satisfy the initial $180,000,
All of it would have to be paid off.
right, and we didn't have $180,000 of our own personal liquidity. So in order to have satisfied that, either A, Ali and Josh have to personally write a check for 180, or we need to get a third-party lender, which we did, to give us a check. Basically, we took the bank's money. We felt like ballers for 20 minutes because we had a check for 180,000, and then we drove it over to the hard money lender's house, and they actually had a check for 180,000.
I just want to rephrase it one more time, right? So the hard money lender gave us $180,000 that we used to purchase the property. But when we were making that 6-month worth of payments, we're not paying down the 180,000. We're making interest only payments. So they charged us 12% interest. So we were paying 12% interest on the 180,000. So it's like when you're paying a credit card bill, but you're making the minimum payment, the balance isn't going down. So we were making interest only payments just as like a thank you for giving us that money. But bridge loans are not intended to be forever loans. So it was a means to an end that got us to the point of being able to refi, because we had to pay off that $180,000 to that hard money lender. We weren't making any payments towards that. Like our monthly interest payments were like $1,500 or something along that line. So yeah.
Actually, I'm reading the question from Lynn Mattoon here, and I actually wanted to comment on that because we thankfully, when we were buying our first rental property, Ali had just graduated from her master's program just about a year prior, so we had W-2 income on the books. But because I had been fired, I was now a self-employed person. I was doing Uber, I started some consulting work, so on and so forth. And so to Lynn's question, she's got a lot of equity. Now, plenty of equity is also subjective, right? So you could have, is plenty 30,000, 300,000, figuring out how much you would need to actually achieve the goals that you have. But secondly, you mentioned you're a 1099 worker, so maybe self-employed, and your debt to income doesn't qualify. So most lenders in our experience, rarely will I walk into like the Bank of Mariah and Mariah say, hey, you know what? You don't qualify. Goodbye. If Mariah's good at what she does, she's going to say, you know what? Right now, you don't perfectly fit in our box, but hang out with me for 5 minutes. Let's put together an entire plan of action by which we can either improve the odds of you qualifying in some manner, right? Most lenders that we work with, because they want business, right? And not everyone fits in a perfect box. And so maybe Mariah would help you figure out, okay, well, here's your DTI. What are some things that we can do, so on and so forth, to improve that? And then also kind of really evaluate, hey, Lynn, I know you mentioned you have plenty of equity, let's actually dig in a little bit more, because maybe if you have, you know, $300,000-400,000 of equity, maybe we can attribute some of that towards your overall risk profile and have a higher probability of being able to finance you. If you ever walk into, or I say walk into, but if you're ever talking to a lender and they're basically just like, nope, you don't qualify. So for instance, you mentioned you're having a hard time refinancing. If they're not willing to educate you and find ways to get solutions, in my opinion, it might be time to talk to someone else.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, it seems like there's just a limitless amount of question because y'all are incredible thought leaders and have such great experience. So we could go on all night, but I did want to just say thank you so much. This has been super informative, and your time has just been so valuable. So thank you. In terms of, next steps, how can people reach you? Because clearly they have all the questions, and you've got an incredible mentorship group. So talk to me a little bit about that and how people can reach you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, and I just put our email in the chat. It's info@thefycouple.com. So Ali and I have made just about every mistake that you could make in real estate
In
finance. And sometimes it's only cost us a couple hundred. Sometimes it's cost us like 15,000. So 3 years ago, we started a community where we're working to help people avoid a lot of the mistakes that we've made, ultimately have an easier time getting started in real estate, and then gain financial freedom faster as a result. If people are interested in learning about that mentorship, right now we have over 300 investors from all over the United States that we're really proud to work with. A lot of the states that were mentioned tonight, we have investors who invest and live in those cities. So you can either you can either reach us at email at info@thefycouple, or on Instagram, just send us a private message.
The best way to get through to us is email. We have like hundreds of unread private messages on Instagram. It's hard to keep up, but essentially, yeah, with our mentorship community, we knew how scary and overwhelming it was to be a new investor. So we wanted to create a space where we kind of like hold your hand through the process, because I remember that first rental and we cried the whole way through and said, we just want someone to hold our hand and tell us we're not ruining our life. So that's what we want to be to other people. So it's been so fun connecting with you guys and answering all of your questions, and just like wherever you are in the investing process, this is such an empowering experience to be able to, take control of your finances and invest and improve your life. But it's challenging. So just know that like you're going to take 2 steps forwards, you're going to take 10 steps backwards, but just staying consistent and working towards your goals, you'll get there. So it's been awesome to connect to everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, it really is all about the people connection. So reach out to them. If you haven't already, reach out to myself or anyone on the Backflip team, and download the app so you can start to analyze your properties and make that next step in your journey. Again, thank you all so much. We'll talk to you all soon, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
You too.